Welcome to Transcendent. I'm Joe, and I'm the dad.
And I'm Raya, and I'm the daughter. Today we have a message from one of our listeners that has been listening to the podcast, is very excited about it, and has really commented on how good our relationship is and the dynamic that the two of us have together. And I thought I would read this, and so we can discuss this a little bit. And the listener writes, I liked your podcast. Some thoughts I might have had might have changed in later episodes since I've only listened to the first one so far. The end where you talk about why you're doing it would have been nicer at the beginning. And I think since then we've kind of gotten a little more used to what we're doing at the podcast too, that now we really know that we are about maintaining positive relationships together. And then they go on to say, I like the dynamic relationship you have with your dad. Also, as a person separated from my parents, the last part was really hard to hear. Talking about breaking relationships and how it shouldn't happen, and if it does happen, it likely won't be mended or whatever to that effect. I didn't feel like there was any wiggle room for someone where it just didn't work. And you and I talked about this a little bit beforehand, that we have somebody in mind that we're thinking, a difficult person, a difficult family member, that we can imagine coming out to her would be a lot more than just the issue itself. And sometimes in our discussions, I think it's easy to oversimplify and make it so that, everything is all sunshine and roses. And if we just try hard enough, it's all going to work out. But sometimes there can be difficult people or manipulative family members or difficult family members that have their own set of issues. And we're always bringing a long set of history in, and it's not just the issue of coming out. And so I wonder if we could talk a little bit about that. This listener has a really good point here, I think.
Well, it's interesting you should bring that up. You may not be aware of it, but you and I, in the past, when we worked together, often had to negotiate with difficult people. And usually it was because we were trying to acquire an acquisition of some type. What would happen is we would begin with a proposal and it would fall apart. And we think, it's over. It can't happen. And we eventually worked it out so that sometimes it did come together. And what was our secret? Our secret was coming back to the table and beginning with what we agree with rather than where we have our differences. So we begin to outline things we agree with. The other thing we always remembered was that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And that's what often elevates situations. It's the fact that you're beginning to talk like this, and I've had enough of that. And that's not the way you should be approaching something where you're trying to develop a relationship.
And of course, it takes, as the saying goes, it takes two to tango. And it's not always you. You can come in with all of the right attitudes and the right mindset, and you say, I'm going to make it work. And if the person just is really difficult and manipulative, or they come in with that attitude and you thought, oh, boy, I wanted to keep things down. I wanted to keep things from getting so elevated. But boy, they just come in and they said that thing and it just makes me,
And that person that's coming in and saying that is thinking, why can't they see where they're wrong? Why can't they see that this is way out of line? Why can't they see that you just can't approach that? And so when you bring something up, you bring up the fact that you're coming out, or you bring up something even less than that. You talked before about the idea of coming, testing the waters before you come out. That was in an earlier podcast that we did. And that is one way to approach it. But the whole idea is that you have to begin, whatever your situation is, you have to begin by discovering what do you agree on. And once you've worked your way through that and as many things that you do agree on, and get each other to agree on something. There is something you can agree on. If you're having an issue with the person coming out, I'm speaking now as the parent, what do you agree on? Well, I'll tell you what I agree on. I agree on the fact that you are my child and I love you. Now, maybe you haven't even said that for a long time. Maybe you think, I love who you were. But the agreement is there that at some point there was a positive relationship. Do we agree on that? And you move forward from there. There are a lot of things that could have really broken your relationship already, dramatically broken it. And if it's dramatically broken, are you beyond mending that relationship?
When you're coming out, you're not coming in on a clean slate. And it's easy to talk about this as if it is, as if there's no history. But of course, there's times where the other person, and you remember the things that they've done to hurt you. And what do you think that other person is thinking about? They're probably remembering the things where they have felt hurt in this. And the person that you and I talked about beforehand that we kind of had in mind, I remember a time, now she's no longer with us, she's since passed on, but I remember a time growing up where we had a whole holiday thing together. We sat down to play a game of Pictionary. And we've often said that games can be a great way to bring relationships together again because it gives you a common thing to be able to focus on. But I remember as we were playing this game with her that so she and her daughter were playing together. They were on a team. And when her daughter would draw the picture would be a pretty good picture and it would finish and she would say, well, how would you ever expect me to get the answer from that? That doesn't look anything like a dog. And then her turn would come up to draw the picture and she would say, it would finish and her daughter wouldn't get it. She would say, how could you not get this? This obviously looked like a car or whatever you were supposed to get. And I thought, boy, that would be really difficult to stay there, and continue with that. But yet, one of the things that can make it work is by finding some ways to get some space. We found an article online. This comes from Teen Vogue, where they were doing an interview with an expert. And it started off, though, they said in America, there are an estimated 1.6 million homeless young people, according to the True Colors Fund. Of those people, 40% are LGBTQ+, and many of them are out on the street because of family rejection. While this is one of the worst case scenarios, and many LGBTQ young people come out to great support from their families, others find themselves in a middle ground, one where one parent supports them or another rejects them. And oftentimes it's not so black and white, is it?
No, it's definitely not black and white, but it seems like it to both sides because there's nothing they can agree on. And they built this situation where it's just accelerated the division. You get to a point where it is so elevated that there is nothing they're meeting with. There was a poet born in 1882, died in 1996, by the way, by the name of Burton Braley. You might know that name if you are a fan of poetry. His most famous poem was called Do It Now. And he also had another one called The Will to Win. But this is really appropriate to our situation. Forget about where you were in the past and talking about the past. Go forward. That's what it's all about. This poem is called Start Where You Stand. And here it is. Start where you stand. Never mind the past. The past won't help you in beginning new. If you have left it all behind at last, why, that's enough. You're done with it. You're through. This is another chapter in the book. This is another race that you have planned. Don't give the vanished days a backward look. Start where you stand. The work won't care about your old defeats if you can start anew and win success. The future is your time, and time is fleet. There is much of work and strain and stress. Forget the buried woes and dead despairs. Here is a brand new trial right at hand. The future is for him who does and dares. Start where you stand. Old failures will not halt. Old triumphs aid. Today's the thing. Tomorrow soon will be. Get in the fight and face it unafraid, and leave the past to ancient history. Where has been, has been. Yesterday is dead, and by it you are neither blessed nor banned. Take courage, man. Be brave. Drive ahead. Start where you stand.
That's a good poem.
And it's true. So often, if you're in a situation where every time you get together with that child, or every time you get together with that parent, you begin with situations that one of you immediately brings, yeah, but you said, or, well, I remember this, or whatever. No. To develop a positive relationship, the first thing you have to remember is start where you stand. And that will begin the process. Then we go to step 2. And step 2 is when you start where you stand, begin with what you agree with.
So, how does that work in a situation where, let's say I have a family member where every time we get together, I leave feeling depressed. And I tried so hard. You know, we got together for Christmas and I thought this was going to be a good time, and it wasn't. And now here it's sitting with me for the next day or 2 days or 3 days or week or 2 weeks. And oh, man, I really wish that I wouldn't have had that time, because I feel worse for the time that I spent with them.
Well, you may have actually given me the answer just by your question. You said, every time we get together, when I leave, I feel worse. How do you think the other person feels? Probably the same. Every time we get together, I feel worse afterward. So both of you are feeling worse. What you probably should do is you should begin by saying, you know, lately I've noticed every time we get together, when I'm done, I feel worse. And I think you do too. Let's try something different. What do you suggest? What do you think about the idea that we should maybe begin by talking about what we agree on? What do we agree on? I'll tell you one thing I agree on with you. I remember when you were a kid, man, I just loved all of this stuff you did, and it was so wonderful. There were such happy times there. Do you remember that? Were those happy times? You remember that? Remember the time that when we walked 2 miles to a store just to get ice cream, And I talked so much about the different flavors and all the ice cream. And by the time you got there, you were just so happy to be able to walk into that place, and you were amazed. Your eyes got so big at all the different flavors you could see and how wonderful it was. And you mentioned to me so many times after that, months, maybe years, about the time we went to that ice cream store. That was a highlight of your life. And it was a highlight of mine too. Wasn't that fun?
So what I'm thinking as you're telling this, that would be some self work that you could do even before you come in. That you think to yourself, what is a good memory that I have of my relationship with this person? What is a time that I can think of where I thought, things have been tough, but this was one time, if we could have it like this was a really good time. And spending some time and reminding yourself, you sort of priming the pump, like when you go to one of those old style pumps like we would have when we would go camping, and you have to pump that thing and no water is coming out at first, right? And you have to go and go and go. And then after you've gone maybe 6 or 8 or 10 times, and all of a sudden that little bit of water comes out, and then it comes out and it keeps coming and it keeps coming. You prime the pump for yourself until you remember those good times, those good emotions.
Yes, I think that's true. I think that's a good analogy. Um, and that's something that you want to set a good mood to start. I think that's what you're saying. Set a good mood to start. But part of the problem that we have is in encountering people with ideas or views or uh, part of their makeup that says, you're different from me. And I just can't accept that. That may be not just one sided, but two sided. It works both ways. You may be the person who's coming out, or you may be the person who's been out for a while, and you just can't accept the fact that they don't understand this. You can't accept the fact that they see this as way out there. They can't accept the fact that they see you as way out there. They can't accept the fact that they don't understand it. They can't accept the fact that they don't want to understand it, because there is a fear that if they try to understand it, it may change their view. And that's not uncommon, no matter what. Let's take it down a notch, if you want to call it that. But let's look at a different notch. We're talking politics. In politics, we can be liberal or we can be conservative. And what we tend to do, we tend to hang out with people who are like us. We tend to watch the TV stations that are like us.
Mm-hmm. And now more than ever.
Absolutely. We tend to follow the people who write things that are like us. And if they're way out there, you follow that and you become more and more like that. And you're trained because you're with the only group that seems right. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but the truth is, no side is always right all the time. And we're taking it back to LGBTQ. And you can be on one side or the other. And I'll tell you in all honesty, I don't care what you say, you are not right all the time. You tend to follow your group only, and some of your group is going to take it to a level that's beyond logic. And some of the other side is going to take it to a level that's beyond logic. So you need to start where you stand and figure out, have I actually looked at what the other side is saying? And is there anything at all that they've said that in reality makes sense.
You and I have gone through this. And I like how the message says they like the dynamic that you and I have, but we have invested a lot in this relationship. And you mentioned in an earlier podcast how when I originally transitioned, there were times where you would say something and you would think, well, that was no big deal. And it would really hurt. And I would have a big response. And you said, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. In a moment like that, and you may be the parent right now that's listening, and you think, boy, I just can't say anything right. Or you're the person and that your family members come out to you and you think, well, what was the big deal here?
Right?
Well, whatever it was obviously a big deal, and it could be an issue where you didn't know. And I think you and I learned to navigate those times. But it was hard at first because there were times where you would say something that you would think, why is that a big deal? I wouldn't think that that would be, so I used your old name beforehand. Why would that be a big deal? But you learned how deeply emotional that is for me to hear my old name. And you learned I may not, yeah, you still might not understand why. Heck, I think I don't understand why it affects me like it does, but it does. And I think you know that now.
Yes, I do. But I heard you say,
Yeah, let me say what I said. I said it today. I said, because I've discovered for myself that there are certain times where I can say my old name as long as it's not referring to me. So I gave my name today to somebody. I explained my name is Raya. It's like Ryan but without the N. And I can say that because I'm not referring to me. But if I were to try to say because my old name was the name I just said, I can't say it. There's something about it for me that the distinction between the two is night and day difference, and I can't say it if it's that brings up really hurtful memories. And so I think for you, you've learned that there are times where you maybe didn't understand it, why it was so hurtful to me. And you've thought, I think I just really wish that she could just let it go and not make such a big deal out of it. But you recognized that for whatever reason, it did make a difference to me. And we learned to navigate those.
you also learned to navigate the fact that I wasn't doing it intentionally to hurt you, that I wasn't wrong, that you learned to accept the fact that I made a mistake or something like that.
Do you
You
think
have to do both sides.
Do you think that I ever didn't think that you were doing? Did you ever think that I ever thought that you were doing it intentionally?
Of course not. But you would react, especially early on.
Uh huh.
You would react by rejecting me, walking away, or something like that. It wasn't. We weren't able to. We weren't able to accept people ideas on the other side. Now, this isn't an idea,
Yeah.
but it's a situation, and we do now.
Yeah. It's hard. It takes some time. It
Yeah.
takes some time because we can only see things from our own perspective, and then we have to learn to see things from the other perspective.
I think
And
that's the hardest thing.
I think so often when somebody is dealing with a new thing, and this is whether it's somebody dealing with a new, maybe they have a new injury, and now they have new health issues that they have to deal with, and we've never had to navigate that before, or it's somebody coming out, or it's new whatever. The person that doesn't have to go through it doesn't know what you have, but the person that's going through it, it's obvious and you can't escape it. And so, because we can only see things from our own perspective, it takes that time as the person that's navigating this whole new world learns to teach the other person. And the other person learns to recognize, oh, if I get some feedback from you that this was difficult, I'm going to spend some extra time and stop and say, help me understand why this was difficult. And I'll give you some space if maybe you can't explain to me right now because maybe you don't have the emotional capacity to be able to explain why you're feeling hurt on top of the fact that you're already feeling hurt.
When you're trying to develop a positive relationship that you haven't had for a while, if you get a little movement, the reaction would be, oh, well, now I guess you decided it's okay to talk to me. Don't think that that is something that you should turn into the negative. Big deal. Is that all you're doing? No. When you reach that point, it's a step in the right direction. And that is critical. I talked to a friend recently a good friend actually, who just discovered that you were transgender. And they said, I said first, either we accept it or we lose them. That's just how it is. And he responded to me by saying, well, I can be accepting, but not affirming. Maybe my reaction could have been, no, you've got to be affirming. You got to be all in. But that's not right. That's not true. It's a step in the right direction. Start where you stand. Here's where we are. That's where you are. Okay, there's something we agree on. I'm accepting, but I happen to be in the next step. I'm affirming.
Mm-hmm.
If we have a relationship that we've got at least one step in, you're working in the right direction.
I think when an LGBTQ plus person is coming out, we feel especially vulnerable. And it can be very difficult to maintain those relationships in that time where what we need, or at least what we feel like we need, is complete acceptance, complete affirmation. And if we don't have it, there may be a time where we say, I feel like I need to take a step back. But I think what we're trying to say is we don't know your situation. We don't know all of what you're going through. We don't know the whole history. But we can say, I would say two things. Number one, regardless of where your relationship is, there's a value in the relationship just because of the relationship. And even if you have to invest in a way where you feel like it's not worth the dividends, it will be worth it. And number two, regardless of where you are right now, where you're feeling, I need to take a step back, or I think I can be present, or I can be tentatively present, or anywhere in between in that spectrum. The goal is always that we would have the attitude of, I want the relationship to be mended. And maybe that's not possible right now. Maybe there's a moment where we need to take a step back, but my attitude is, I'm always looking for that place where, when can I find that common ground? When can we get to the place? Where can we grow so that I'm never thinking, well, forget it, I'm done, I'm sick of it, I'm tired. I'm never happy to be done with the relationship. I'm never happy that things are broken. I'm always longing for, yearning for, having an attitude of hoping to mend the relationship because relationships are worth it.
You said something really important at the beginning of what you just said here, and that is we don't know where you are in the relationship. We don't know. So it's difficult for us to give you the exact answer from where you are. You might be in a relationship with somebody who doesn't agree with you, but they're compassionate. You may be in a relationship with somebody who's completely, totally rejected you. And it's so total that they say, I don't even want to see you until you change your mind, your attitude. That could be. And you could be the person saying that to the parent, or you could be the parent saying that to the person who's um, um, LGBTQ or just coming out,
Right.
or
Or the other way around.
yeah,
Again,
it
it could
could
be
be. It could be
sister or a brother or a sibling. It could
exactly.
be the parent that's coming out. It could be a host of different things.
So since we don't know where you are, there are some takeaways you can get from this. Takeaway number one is start where you stand. Forget the past. Start where you stand. What do you agree on? Where can you find common ground? And you think there is no place I can find common ground? That's not true. There has been a time in your life, in that relationship life, at some point when there was common ground. And that's takeaway number two. Start there. Start where there's common ground. That's where you stand. That's where a relationship was okay. Maybe that was one day in the entire relationship.
What was that good memory that you have? Maybe there was a time the two of you went roller skating,
Yeah.
or a time when the two of you went out for pizza together, or a time when the two of you sat around and you had a really fun Christmas and you sang some songs together, or it was when you went to a sports game together. What is your story? And use that as your starting place.
My real father, I was adopted, but I knew my real father. And my real father was somebody that I had a hard time having a relationship with. I can remember when I was 6 years old and he had me come over and he wanted to do something. He wanted to enjoy me. He said, "Oh, you're a nice boy." And I sat on his lap for I don't know how long, not very long at all. And all the while I sat on his lap, I was scared to death. And when I was able to go get down, I was out of there as quick as I could get out of there. He was trying to do something. He began by trying to develop a relationship with me, but at 6 years old, I didn't understand that. Long after that, I only saw him a couple of other times. My mother and father got a divorce, and I was out of there. When I say I was adopted, my mother remarried a guy who was my father in my mind, and he's the guy who adopted me, and he was a great father. But after I was out of high school, out of college, I attempted to begin a relationship with him again. And what made it apparent that I could do that, I remember there were some times, he was a musical person, and there were times when we sang some songs together. And that was the only happy time I could think of. And so I used that to bridge the relationship. What I learned from that was that he was not the kind of person that knew how to handle kids. He didn't know how to get along with kids. But when I tried to mend that relationship, I was an adult. And he was an adult. And it worked pretty good. Never got close, but we got a lot closer than we did when I sat on his lap. So there is a time somewhere in that relationship. If that was a relationship, there was a happy time. Find it and build on it.
We'd love to hear your story. Maybe as you're hearing us talk, you have your own idea in your mind, your own story in your mind. We would love to hear it, and we would love to share that on a future podcast. You can email us, trenddescendant@gmail.com. And we will talk about that in a future podcast. We thank you so much for joining us here today, and we will talk to you next week.
Tell your friends. Tune in. We want to hear from you. Thank you for listening. And as always, domo arigato gozaimashita.